So welcome everyone. I'm Gina Howell. I'm from Southeastern Sustainability Center. Thank you for your time and joining us today. I love seeing all y'all's faces. We will be recording today's presentation and we'll post the link of the Green Talks online, so on our online guide. So if you guys wouldn't mind just muting your mics until our Q&A at the end, that would be awesome. So we actually started our Green Talks 3 years ago to promote environmental literacy on campus and in our community. And since then, we've had so many presentations from recycling to renewable energy to green business and wetland conservation. And those are just to name a few if you haven't seen them yet. And today, we're happy to have Dr. Liz Davey here. She's from Tulane University, where she's the director of the Office of Sustainability. So her topic is climate action, getting from 2020 to 2030. So she will talk to us today about the implications of 2020 for climate change and how we can actually achieve the levels of greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030. So welcome, Dr. Davey.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so nice to join you guys today. And I really appreciate you inviting me to give this talk. I have worked at Tulane for over 20 years on our sustainability programs. And as now you guys have an incredible sustainability program and have done some really neat things with clean energy and renewable energy, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. But so you're familiar with the Office of Sustainability and what it does and how we're sort of half working with the university to reduce the working with the university offices to reduce our environmental impact, but then also working with students to help create learning opportunities and sustainability, both in the class and then in our extracurricular activities. And today, I just thought this was a nice chance to share some thoughts that I have on moving forward from 2020 and addressing climate change, and ways that we can create opportunity, address inequality, and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions if we get really serious about it. So the title of my talk, Getting from 2020 to 2030. And it's always nice when you're teaching or speaking and there's a story in the paper that day that's just directly about your topic. And I don't know if you guys heard about this. I don't know if it was front page in the Times-Picayune-NOLA.com, but just yesterday, there was the first meeting of the governor's new climate initiatives task force. And I think their first meeting actually was supposed to be October 30th, and I'm guessing it was actually postponed because of a hurricane. But this is a group that includes environmental people, government people, and industry people. And they are tasked with coming up with a climate plan for Louisiana. So how can we reduce our emissions and also, well, actually it's really aimed at reducing emissions as much as even more than adapting to climate change. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but one of my goals for the talk today is to give you all some ideas of what could possibly go into it and what some ideas of what specific things Louisiana can do coming out of the pandemic that could go towards reducing our emissions. So I teach a class at Tulane called Measuring Sustainability, and it's kind of a tools of the trade of a sustainability professional. How do we track our progress? What should we look at to know if we're becoming a more sustainable university, if we're contributing to making a more sustainable society? And there are two kinds of approaches that are really important to know in measuring sustainability and working in sustainability, and they are totally different, okay? The first one is what I call sustainability frameworks. And that comes originally from the LEED Green Building Rating System. And the idea behind these frameworks is that sustainability has multiple components. It's how energy efficient you are, it's your water use, how you use waste, okay? It also can include social impacts because that original definition of sustainability goes back to sustainable development and meeting the needs of the current generation without sacrificing without it hindering the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So that measurements of equity, diversity, health, those can be part of a sustainability framework either as well. So there's even a sustainability framework that's just aimed at measuring university sustainability, and it's called STARS. Okay? And basically these frameworks are different measuring action in all these different areas, and then they give you points for how many of them you meet or how well you're doing in all these different areas, and then they give you a rating. So it's trying to put together all those multiple facets of sustainability. The other way of measuring sustainability that I rely a lot on, and I know some of you in the class working on a carbon footprint are learning about, is doing a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And if you think about it, it's kind of the complete opposite approach to measuring sustainability, because instead of looking at all these different factors that we typically think of with sustainability, it's boiling down our impact to this one number, our impact on climate change, the metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent that result from our activities. Okay, so it's always so wonky to talk about it, and it's even hard to recognize this number or this unit of metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent. But it's so fundamental to work in climate change, and it's going to be the main unit of measure that you see in most of my graphs today. Another confusing thing about it is that E in metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent. That means that there are other greenhouse gases, not just CO2, included in that measurement. And the other funny thing is, as with a lot of things in sustainability, it's abbreviated in all kinds of crazy different ways. And I listed some of them on the E can be anywhere in the abbreviation.
Liz?
But the point, yep.
On my screen, I'm still seeing your title
Oh, no.
slide.
Okay.
So I just wanted to, I didn't know if it was just me.
No, you were, okay. Oh, sorry, guys. So I'm back to you guys.
You can click on the presenter mode on share current slide, and I think that should work that way. I see it now.
Presenter mode on share current slide. Oh, if I go to the, so you don't see that. Now are you seeing all my slides?
There we go. So it's just pulling up right now. Let's see. Perfect. Okay. And then you can just scroll per
Now
slide.
scroll.
I'm
Scroll
just going to
down.
do it like this, right?
Yeah,
Just on like
that's
that.
what.
Okay.
Can you see that? Okay, so that's what I was talking about. Oh, good. So just as this is just, and then I just wanted to show you, here's the picture of John Bell Edwards speaking to his Climate Initiatives Task Force yesterday. Okay, thank you, Angie. So here's Tulane's greenhouse gas emissions inventory for almost 15 years. And again, this is that number that I look at every year to see how we're doing in terms of sustainability, in part because climate change is just such an overwhelmingly important issue to focus on, but then also because it tracks so many different components of sustainability as well. Just some basic things of reading or working on and again, this is called a carbon footprint commonly, but when you work in institutions, you'll see it called a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. The reason you see blue bars and green bars on this is it distinguishes between how responsible you are for emissions. So scope 1 emissions are when you actually release the greenhouse gas emissions. So you burn the gallon of gas, you burn the CCF of natural gas in your power plant. The green emissions are the emissions that result from your utility generating energy that you buy. So your utilities emissions from providing you electricity. So there's a third scope, which is all kinds, it's kind of a grab bag of all kinds of indirect emissions. So the emissions that result from the paper you use, the food that you use, the commuting of your staff and faculty. But scope 1 and scope 2, those are kind of the emissions that you can measure or calculate the most concretely. So if you look at Tulane's emissions inventory, you can see that over the last 12 years, we went up for a little bit after Katrina as students came back. Around 2011, we started reducing again with some big energy efficiency projects. And then we started climbing again with more students and adding more building space. And then last year, we really started to see the drops resulting from our efforts to reduce emissions. And the black line is our 2020 target. That's 15% below 2007 levels that we want to reach by 2020. Okay, so this is another kind of graph that you'll see a lot in sustainability work. This is called a wedge graph, and this is if you look at the numbers along the bottom, it has a little bit of the past. It goes back to 2007, but then it looks ahead to the future. It goes all the way up to 2050. And again, it's measuring metric tons CO2 equivalent, so the greenhouse gas emissions. And that top dotted line, that's business as usual. So that's the assumptions of what our emissions would be if we just went along today, not making any effort to try to reduce them. And it grows just a little bit with like adding students or adding space. And then it's called a wedge graph because each one of those colored bars is called a wedge. And that's showing the savings from particular actions that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this chart was actually produced for us by consultants who took all the ideas of the university community, including our facilities team, including and especially our facilities team, of how we could reduce emissions. And then they actually quantified like how many metric tons CO2 equivalent will that reduce? How much will that cost? And then the wedges are ordered sort of in order of the most cost effective and the biggest impact. So it's kind of that light green bar that's at the top. That's the action that we can take that will cost the least and make the biggest difference. So we should get started doing it first. And the colored bar sort of indicates the emissions that would reduce. And if you notice, I don't know if your little windows are covering it on the side, but the top two wedges are both building energy conservation measures. So they're doing really basic energy conservation programs in our buildings on our uptown and downtown campus. And then the next two wedges have to do with making our power plant more efficient. Both the actual power plant, you guys probably have a power plant as well that makes steam or chilled water to heat or cool the buildings. And then it pumps the water around, there's a pumping system that pumps the chilled water or the steam around campus, and making that more efficient is a very large, can reduce greenhouse gas emissions a lot too. So those two actions we just completed this year. So we should be seeing those savings really hit now. And we've made some progress on the energy conservation measures for the buildings, but we're really just getting started and there's so much more there to do. Okay, so I just wanted to give you that as like a sample of the work that's happened at Tulane on greenhouse gas emissions up till now. So let's talk a little bit about 2020 and 2030. So I don't need to tell you about all the different disruptions of this past year and how a health catastrophe has exposed just the inequality in our society. We have a very uncertain economy right now. We have a lot of unemployment in our society. right now. We've had protests from our local neighborhoods to around the world against systemic racism. We've seen during the pandemic how climate impacts, like more fires and hurricanes, are just going to be even more hard to deal with. The pandemic made it complicated, even harder to manage those emergencies. We saw climate change become an election issue for the first time. And then we also all experienced all these major changes in our daily life, and as a result, our daily energy use, especially transportation. Some of those changes are just really short term, and then some of them might be long term. And then we actually even may have more energy use in the future as a result from some of the measures taken to fight the virus. And this little graph just shows just one tracking of world emissions of different air pollutants at the beginning of this year, that we actually went as low as a reduction of CO2 of 25% in the spring. But that's obviously not the way that we want to reduce emissions in the long run. 2030 is important for us to keep in mind, because that's one of the main target years that was set by an extremely important report called Global Warming of 1.5 degrees. That report is where this call to reduce emissions by 50% in the next 10 years comes from, and where the call to get to net zero CO2 emissions by 2050 comes from. And just the origins of this report are in the actual negotiations of the Paris Climate Agreement. Some of the most vulnerable countries there disagreed with having a goal of 2 degrees Celsius of warming, which had always been the goal. There had always been a goal of limiting warming to 2 degrees in the international climate treaties. And some of the most vulnerable countries, like small island nations, said, that's too much. We don't think we can handle that much warming. So the IPCC, which is that international network of scientists affiliated with the United Nations that reviews the research on climate change, they looked at 1.5 degrees Celsius warming versus 2 degrees of warming. And I just have a super simple summary of their results there. There are going to be impacts at 1.5 degrees, but they'll be much less than 2 degrees. And then they did modeling that showed that we could hold warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, but, and this is what this graph shows, that we would need to start making emissions reductions much faster and much deeper in order to make that goal. Okay. So whenever you hear activists, reporters talking about the need to reduce emissions by half in the next 10 years, this really important study is where it comes from. Okay, so how do we get to 2030 from 2020? Interestingly, when you read lots of different the work of lots of different researchers and the thinking of lots of different climate change thinkers, it's not the changes that happened during the pandemic that are going to make a difference. It's what we do coming out of the pandemic. It's going to be how we recover. So those emissions reductions that we had in the spring, the emissions reductions that we're going to have this year, which will probably be about 7% globally, they will limit warming very little. However, a lot of money is going to be spent in the next few years trying to help the economy recover after the pandemic. And if some of that money focuses on actions that can create jobs and economic impact as they reduce emissions, we can make a lot more progress towards those 2030 reductions goals. And importantly, this is going to be an important opportunity to address racial inequality as well, as we want to create jobs, help low-income people, people of color, connect with those jobs and those new opportunities as they're made. So this is basically what you'll hear called a green recovery, a green stimulus. And the basic idea is that we use both economic and climate criteria to figure out the actions that we do. And this slide has just a very simple little summary of the general kinds of actions that will really make a difference. And then I'm going to talk about some of the specific ones for Louisiana. But investing in clean energy physical infrastructure. So when you hear things about investing in infrastructure, it doesn't have to be just roads and bridges. It can be a better electrical grid that can handle the renewables. It can be wind turbines. It can be a solar farm. You're always going to see building energy efficiency mentioned. Investments in education and training so that people can fill these new jobs working in clean energy. Investments in ecosystem restoration also have the potential to put people to work right away and reduce emissions and help the environment better able to handle the changes of climate change. And then we also have to invest in research and development of more climate-friendly technologies. And that could be a program of like more grants to universities for faculty and students to do research on clean energy. So thinking about Louisiana and what kinds of investments here could deliver emissions reductions and jobs quickly. Looking into this, one of the things that I've learned is we have a lot of jobs in Louisiana that are related to clean energy and energy efficiency and that we could call climate friendly. And these are figures from an annual report done on jobs in energy. And the purpose of the report is to try to sort of line up the numbers of energy jobs and include energy efficiency and clean energy along with jobs in the more traditional energy jobs in fossil fuels like oil and natural gas. So in this report gives a figure of about 130,000 people in Louisiana working in traditional energy jobs. And that includes they're including clean energy jobs in there. About 80,000 related to fuels, so that's oil and gas jobs, but over 30,000 in clean energy fields. And if you look at that, over 20,000 in energy efficiency. And one reason that you will frequently see, well, there's a bunch of different reasons why you'll see energy efficiency named as the kind of action that we should take right away after the pandemic in order to create jobs and reduce emissions. They're jobs that are construction jobs. They're mostly in small businesses, so these help give them a large economic impact. They're very local jobs. They're not going to be shipped overseas. And these are basically jobs both making products that make buildings more efficient and then actually installing them and then monitoring and maintaining buildings, like being an energy manager. These include jobs for every level of education. So an engineer who's an energy manager, like for a university or institution, and a person who installs insulation in homes or weather stripping in homes. And then one thing that's really important with energy efficiency is that when those projects are implemented, people save money on their utility bills, and then hopefully they spend that money, or more likely they spend that money in their neighborhood, like in their town. And so that can have a big impact on the local economy. So investments in energy efficiency across the country, like if we had a program, it could, there are homes, there are schools, there are universities in almost every county of the United States, so that would distribute jobs and an economic stimulus all across the country. So this is a kind of cool graph. I don't know if you guys can read the fine print on the bottom of each one of those bars. This graph shows the number of jobs that result for each $1 million invested in developing this kind of technology. And those bars over on the left, which are over 12 jobs, those are all different kinds of energy efficiency. Commercial energy efficiency, so that's energy efficiency in businesses, stores, residential energy efficiency, so those are programs in homes, and industrial energy efficiency, making factories and industrial facilities more energy efficient. And it's interesting, these are based on economic models. They're based on like the kind of work and kind of stuff that goes into those jobs. The blue numbers are the direct number of people working in that field. The yellow part of the bar is the indirect jobs created by it. So that's the supplies and the services that support the direct jobs. And then the green part it's called induced impact. And those are the jobs that are created in the community with the money from the spending of the people who are working in the direct and indirect jobs. So energy efficiency, more jobs per dollar invested than any other type of energy project. A quick word about solar. This is from a solar spotlight, and we have a really large solar industry here in Louisiana. We rank right in the middle of the country in terms of the number of solar jobs. We have 55 companies working on solar in Louisiana, and we were one of the states with the most growth in solar the year 2018 to 2019. We had a residential tax credit for solar for many years that really helped get this industry off the ground. And so we have companies that have a lot of skill. They can they have innovative ways of financing solar projects. So if there were any kinds of like national programs making investments in solar, Louisiana companies would be able to put people to work doing those kinds of projects right away. Also looking at these clean energy jobs and which jobs, kind of looking at the question of like, which actions would make the best stimulus actions? Which actions can we do that would create the most jobs and reduce emissions the most? One thing that really strikes you is how many of these different clean energy technologies could really benefit from the experience here in Louisiana in the existing energy industry. One kind of program that you see recommended a lot, and I think was actually even included in the House bill, the House relief bill, is a program that would provide funds for capping orphaned oil and gas wells. So that would put people in the oil industry to work right away, but then also like limit the emissions of greenhouse gases that are leaking from that. So it would have a big climate benefit. Wind energy, obviously building offshore wind in the Gulf could create a lot of construction jobs and some maintenance jobs, but there are actually already a lot of Louisiana firms, there are Louisiana firms designing and building the foundations for offshore wind farms in other places. And in fact, the first offshore wind farm on the East Coast had a foundation that was designed and built by a Louisiana company. Geothermal, which you guys have on your own campus, drilling into the ground and making use of the temperature for the ground is another kind of renewable technology that could build on the experience and the capacity of our existing energy industry. And they're even sort of more large scale kinds of geothermal projects that would drill deeper, that could possibly take advantage of existing wells and use that water to actually generate electricity. And then carbon capture and storage is a kind of it falls into the category of carbon removal projects. So projects that actually take, not just stopping putting carbon into the atmosphere, but taking it out And it's a technology that still has a long way to go before it's like really proven. It's still very expensive, but it has a lot of potential for Louisiana because it could possibly use oil and gas infrastructure, or it could be paired up with industrial facilities that really need too much energy to be able to make that move all the way to renewable energy. Another characteristic of these jobs and these technologies is they pay higher wages, that there are a number of studies that show that jobs in the clean energy sector basically all make a living wage above $15 an hour. What this chart is showing that at each sort of skill level in clean energy jobs, those blue bars show the wages for the clean energy, energy efficiency, or environmental management jobs against the national average wage for that skill level. And interestingly, it's higher at every skill level until you get to the top skill level, and then the environmental people and the clean energy people make a little bit less. But the point is that investing in a program or policies that invest in these clean energy technologies would create good paying jobs, which could be used to address inequality if we make sure that there are pipeline programs so young people, students of color, low-income communities know about these jobs and connect with them. And then this is another kind of to-do list of kinds of projects that have both a big economic impact and a climate impact. And it's kind of a fun list to look at, especially from a Louisiana perspective. It's got industrial energy efficiency in there at the top, carbon capture and storage, but then it goes all the way down to energy efficiency projects at the level of houses, lighting retrofits, street lights. One kind of infrastructure that we can invest in that's important to remember is EV charging networks, that's a kind of construction job, and then actually manufacturing the EV vehicles is another kind of manufacturing job that's both reducing emissions and creating jobs. And I love the last bullet, develop infrastructure for active transport. So even building bike lanes is a kind of project that creates jobs in our communities, but then also reduces carbon emissions in the long run. And there's an important, so these are all jobs that are climate mitigation, as we would call it. So reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And you guys probably know the term climate adaptation. So that's doing the kind of work to get ready for the impacts of climate change. And amazing work has been done in Louisiana in the last 10 years, building up a new sector of the economy, which is restoring the coast and managing stormwater using green infrastructure, green and gray infrastructure. So we can look to that work as a kind of model of the different components that we would need to build up a clean energy economic sector in the state. And it started with the major coastal restoration plans. There's a plan for urban water management in New Orleans, and they kind of identified the key projects that that could be invested in. State and local governments have secured funding from the federal government from projects. We have our local economic development agency helping businesses and universities participate in this work or prepare students to participate in this work. And it's drilled down into the neighborhoods here in New Orleans. We have nonprofits that are helping homeowners take up concrete in their yard to help improve the infiltration and reduce the runoff. And then we have programs that are connecting small businesses and youth from community of color in these jobs. So training programs that help introduce these concepts in this sort of emerging sector of the economy so people can know that these jobs are out there and get the work, you know, as the jobs become available. So hopefully this committee that started will kind of start a similar process in for our state of laying out the actions that can make the biggest difference for climate change, and then and that will also have the most economic benefit to people in the state, and also think about the ways to connect everyone in Louisiana with emerging job opportunities. And then I just wanted to come back to you guys as students, and some resources that start towards some resources for connecting with these kinds of jobs in the future. And one thing that I'm going to work on a lot more at Tulane, you know, coming out of this pandemic experience, is really trying to sort of make clear connections between the work that we do on campus in sustainability and the kind of jobs that are available out there. So to see our sustainability programs, to help students use our sustainability programs to prepare for very specific kinds of jobs in the different sectors of sustainability in the future. And one amazing resource that I'm using more and more is this National Wildlife Federation Eco Leaders Career Center. So I just wanted to kind of leave you with this as a resource. Basically, what you can do is you could click on climate change, or you could click on energy, or if you're more passionate about working in sustainability in food or habitat and wildlife, you can pick that eco topic, and then it's going to take you, and these are just simple screenshots of their websites, first to a web page that tells you a little bit more about that sector. So here's the energy page, and it talks, of course, about doing a campus carbon footprint. Because doing your campus carbon footprint, doing it in your class, that's like a basic first step and skill for working as a sustainability professional. And then there's a link to a page called and I've got it highlighted in that little red circle, a careers outlook page for that eco topic. And it's got just great resources, very specific information on that job and that type of jobs in that sector. So is there going to be growth in this field? What are some of the degrees that you might need if you need graduate education? What are some of the certificates that you might need in that area? And then it gives you some other kinds of resources as well. So they also have a spring conference online that has different panels of people working in different jobs with a focus on recent graduates and the kinds of jobs they've moved on to from working in sustainability at their school. So just before I click away from this, just a few resources. I do have a blog that I just occasionally post things that come across my desk with job opportunities or resources. Our Green Tulane YouTube channel has some great presentations, including about green jobs in Louisiana, including a great one from your sustainability director, Alejandro Martinez. And then there's also the page of the Association of Climate Change Officers. If you want to see, you know, a whole professional organization of people working in climate change. It has courses and certifications and web events that you can join in as well. And with that, I'm going to try to close this and see you guys again. Are you still with me?
Yes, thank you so much. That was so impactful.
Do you have any questions?
I don't see any questions posted in the chat, but we'll take them as you think of them.
I have a
You know what?
question if no one else wants to go first. What advice would you give to students wanting to become change agents for the climate? Like where would you start, do you think?
Well, I think to first understand these basic concepts. So to do the carbon footprint, get involved in the carbon footprint in your school, because I think it's important to understand what are the actions that we can do that are going to make the biggest difference in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So the carbon footprint analysis gives you a tool for doing that, okay? And there's issues with it, but that it can help you understand what are the things that you could work on that would make the biggest difference in terms of emissions reductions. Being a change agent, that's a great question. As students, I think you want to learn as much about the environmental part of this, and then also you have all your classes on how we create change in society. We have lots of groups. You'll notice in this talk I didn't really touch anything on policy, like how do we actually get these technologies implemented. And we have lots of different groups that are proposing different kinds of policies. So this is it's the Green New Deal, the Citizens Climate Lobby promoting a carbon price. So I think also for being a change agent, you want to get involved in a group that is doing some organizing to create change and learn some of their strategies. And that can also be a student organization as well.
Liz, as well as watching our greenhouse gas emissions and getting more energy efficient, what role do you see for reforesting? And you mentioned a little bit the coastal restoration, but what's the role of kind of restoring the ecosystems that we have to bring some balance into the function?
I think you're seeing more and more emphasis on that as a potential solution. So it can happen at many different levels in the community. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the coastal restoration. It does tend to get left out of this approach with the carbon footprint approach, because, of course, it's much harder to measure, how much. And we actually have an amazing group in Louisiana that's trying to quantify the carbon reductions of coastal wetland restoration, so that actually those could be sold as offsets, so that we could actually, use, funds to reduce emissions to support coastal restoration. But a challenge of that is always how is it quantified? Because there are so many different factors involving species and the rate of growth and ensuring that it's going to be protected into the future. I haven't read them, but there's a lot of articles out there about large scale reforestation as a green stimulus measure. And of course, like in the New Deal, we had the Citizens Conservation Corps, which built a lot of our parks. Like when you come to City Park, you see the Works Progress Administration, and the Citizens Conservation Corps was, they were government employees, they were young people, they lived in camps, and they built many of our parks. And that a similar kind of effort could be done now that focuses on ecological restoration. And that could get people to work, within months. So.
Liz, do you see that picture behind my head?
I can barely make it out.
Oh, come on. You're familiar with that picture?
Oh, I can't.
That's the terrace in front of the Union in Madison.
Okay.
Madison, Wisconsin. That's where Liz is
It's awfully
from.
faded in this. Yeah. Right.
It is.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
just so happened
actually-
to be behind me, though, and I thought about you.
Right. Well, and to connect with the question about reforestation, one of the civilian conservation projects was the University of Wisconsin-Madison Arboretum. And that is a huge green space within Madison, which it was kind of groundbreaking for an arboretum because they tried to replant, it was, of course, the idea of Aldo Leopold, but they tried to, instead of just having like a sample of this species and a sample of that species, they replanted and restored whole different habitats from throughout Wisconsin. So it has a major prairie restoration, has some of the different forest types from throughout Wisconsin. So that was a project, you know, to help recover from the Great Depression and put people to work. And it gave us this educational and environmental asset that persists through today. So, and that's definitely the kind of thing we want to be doing now. So.
I have a question from the chat.
Okay.
What kind of role do you see for civic groups like Rotary or Lions Club or Civitans?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, going back to the model of what's happening here in New Orleans with the water management, I think that this core group of people, and maybe also Gina, this could be a model for your change agent question as well, that this, you know, core group of people put forward the idea, and over the years, more and more different organizations within New Orleans have gotten involved. So that we definitely want to, you know, have a plan that a lot of people understand and can see ways to contribute to, you know, the level of their own home, all the way to, you know, larger state policy. So, the water project really they really have done an amazing job. And the more I look at it, the more I see it as an example for the rest of us, because there is just this, people in New Orleans have really embraced this idea of changing our urban landscape to be able to reduce the flooding. You know, and obviously it's something that we have to do. It's a huge concern to everyone, but having many different levels of our society, you know, from individuals to smaller groups to civic groups involved, makes it just much more powerful and effective.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, one more. What do you think we need to do to prioritize ecological development in our state? How do we get more understanding and contribution from the public, not just the people in New Orleans, to the water project?
That's a great question. Well, you know, it's this long struggle to try to break down that false dichotomy between jobs and the environment. So if we can keep emphasizing the opportunity and the jobs in ecological development, that would you know, that would help. I also should confess that we're kind of getting out of my area of expertise, so that I you know, someone who's interested in the answer to that, as much as having an answer myself for it.
I also think, to add to that, it's important for our corporations to not see green jobs as something separate, like a separate entity from them. Because I think for me, in getting into sustainability, the first thing was it's almost like green jobs is a separate kind of working, but you can integrate it. And I think we need to integrate it into our businesses and our corporate structures in order to understand that this is something that is interworking, that has to go together, you know? So that's definitely important too.
And I think that's also a great strategy for looking for a job, because if you're watching for, you know, the sustainability director of X, those jobs are pretty few and far between. But to have sustainability be a skill set that you bring to a traditional job, like a job in city management or planning, you know, that advances you, that gives you, you know, an expertise that's just going to become more and more valuable. So to not be looking for these kind of specialty jobs, as you mentioned, but how could I integrate this in